Hello everyone, welcome to Lucid Main's Current Affairs of Neo IAS. Today we will be covering the topic known as IL and FS crisis. Recently it has been in news that IL and FS company has defaulted and that has caused a crisis in India's economic sector, in particular to NBFC sector of India. So today we will try to understand what is unique about IL and FS, what has been the impact, what are the factors that has led to it, and what are the measures taken by the government, and what is the way forward to contain this crisis. Let's first try and understand what is IL and FS. IL and FS, or Infrastructure Leasing and Financial Services Limited, is an Indian infrastructure development and finance company. It acts as a holding company whose operations are restricted to investments in 346 group companies like ILFS and Energy Development Company, ILFS and Transport Limitation Company, ILF Financial Services Limited. So this company acts as a holding company and funds different other sub-companies. Secondly, IL&FS is considered to be a systematically important non-deposit accepting core investment company by RBI. We know that in banking sector there are systematically important banks whose financial health has ramifications for the financial system of the Indian economy. Similarly, ILFC is an NBFC, non-banking financial company, which is considered to be systematically important, which has ramification upon Indian economy, and it has been regarded so by RBI and is being closely monitored by RBI. Further, it is also a non-deposit accepting NBFC. We know that there are two types of NBFCs. Deposit accepting, that means they take money from different individuals, directly from individuals. And there are non-deposit accepting NBFCs. Those NBFCs which collect money indirectly, that means through mutual funds, through banks. They collect money in such manner. Such NBFCs are known as non-deposit taking NBFCs. So IL and FS is a systematically important non-deposit taking NBFC. Further, it is also a pioneer in public-private partnership. If you look at major Indian infrastructural achievements like the recently constructed Chennai Nashri Tunnel in Jammu and Kashmir or the GIFT City in Gujarat, all these projects have been completed by IL and FC. So this has a significant impact. This company has significant role in Indian infrastructure also. Further, the shareholders of this company is unique because it has both public sector companies like LIC, foreign investors like Abu Dhabi Investment Corporation and Oryx Corporation of Japan. It's a mix of public and private sector companies. And it is an unconventional finance provider because it is not regulated by RBI. It is registered with RBI but not regulated by RBI. But it provides finance. So this is the unique nature of IL and FS company. Now let's try and see what has happened recently. In July 2018, one of the group companies of ILFC, known as Transportation Networks Limited, defaulted on commercial papers that it was supposed to pay back. It defaulted on commercial papers. So once ILF's one company known as the Transportation Network Limited defaulted. Following this, in the month of August, ILF's another group company known as ILFC Financial Services started defaulting. So that also caused another concern in the market. Finally, by the month of October, ILFC itself, the major company itself, started defaulting on a term loan, 1,000 crore term loan it was supposed to pay back to SIDBI. So since this multiple default happened, starting from the group companies and finally in the core company itself, it led to a crisis in the sector. And all the credit rating agencies started to rate the papers, the debt instruments of IL and FC from the highest rating to, that is AA, to junk status. So once this default has occurred and SEBI found that it's not receiving payback, it went to National company law tribunal and asked for payback. Then IL FC asked some time so that it can sell the assets, which the NCLT didn't give. Then further it had to go to NCLAT and received a time period. But meanwhile, government took over the Island FC and it has appointed a new board of Island FC. This is what has happened. ILFC defaulted on different debt instruments like commercial papers, like term deposits, like non-convertible debentures. It started defaulting in all these different multiple instruments in multiple group companies, and it has caused a havoc in the money market of India. Let's understand what is the significance of what we have just seen now. We must understand what is the India's shadow banking sector looking like. We know that individuals, they invest the money into different banks, or they save their money into banks or into mutual funds. The banks and mutual fund invest this money in security, shares, and also they invest in NBFCs. They give this money to good NBFCs, and NBFCs in return give them different debt instruments like commercial papers, like non-convertible debentures, convertible debentures, certificates of deposits, etc. So NBFCs give these documents, banks and mutual funds makes the investment. What does NBFC do with this money? They further make investment into large infrastructure projects like Chennai industry that we have seen, into MCMEs, medium and small scale enterprises, MSMEs, and do real estate sector, etc. So NBFCs make investment of this money and receive payback. This is the larger picture of shadow banking sector in India. And when one more agent is also in this sector known as rating agencies. What do rating agencies do? These agencies rate different debt instruments issued by the NBFCs. NBFCs with good payback, good credit history will get high rating. And with high rating, they can get loans for small interest rate. So credit rating agencies like CRISIL, etc., CARE, CRISIL, etc., makes the rating of different debt instruments issued by the NBFCs. This is the larger picture of the shadow banking sector that is present in India. Now let's look at the exposure of, here's an example of a different major mutual funds in India. If you look at this particular Aditya Birla mutual fund, they are having almost 41% of their whole lending into NBFCs only. That shows the relation between mutual funds and NBFCs. And to look at the significant role played by the NBFCs, if you look at the Indian economy itself, 12% of total lending in Indian economy happens through NBFCs. These two are shows the significance of NBFC in Indian economy. Let's understand one significant commercial paper of all different papers, that is known as one debt instrument of all different debt instruments known as commercial paper. Commercial paper is issued by NBFCs. They have a small maturity period, like 7 days to 1 year. That is a maturity period for a commercial paper, which is a debt instrument. It's a short-term borrowing debt instrument that is used by NBFCs. Further, now this is the background. So we have seen different, we understood what is the uniqueness of ILFC, we understood what has happened, we understood what is the background, and let's see what is the impact that it has created. If you look at newspaper, there is a term known as liquidity crunch that comes always in newspaper with regard to ILFC crisis. A liquidity crunch has happened. Why? Because mutual funds, banks, all have invested their money into this ILFC company, and it has defaulted almost 1 lakh crore, and this money gets stuck. So mutual funds and banks don't have enough money to invest into other industries. So this money is stuck. So there is a liquidity crunch in the economy. Mutual funds, especially for mutual funds, due to this feature, what happens? For mutual funds which has large exposure in IL and FC, the customers will come and they ask for return of their money. Due to this factor, mutual funds will have to sell their securities in other companies. So what happens? Other companies also gets affected due to this crisis. Further, what happens? Let's look at other NBFCs. Now, if they go to the market, they would not get funding. So what happens? The borrowing cost in the market increases. Now NBFCs will have to look at other out of the country borrowing mechanisms like external commercial borrowings, etc. Now another aspect that can happen is dependency on commercial papers, which is one of the liquid and most present form of debt instrument in the market, that gets reduced. So to summarize the liquidity crunch that has happened, now due to liquidity crunch, what happens? The mutual funds and banks won't have enough money to lend to other economies and to other institutions. Due to that, they will have to sell the securities of other companies. The borrowing cost in the economy increases. The faithfulness, dependency on commercial paper reduces. Then other NBFCs will have to depend on external commercial borrowing to run their companies. That is the one aspect of the IL FC crisis. The other aspect of IL FC crisis is, we have seen in the initial graph that there are a lot of institutions that receive funding from NBFCs, like infrastructure, like MSMEs, like real estate sector. All this will receive a shortage in funding due to this crisis. For example, NBFCs receive 30% of their lending from NBFCs. So now this MSMEs will be affected because NBFCs are running short of money due to the liquidity crunch that we have just seen now. For the share of NBFCs in the total credit of India is increasing in otherwise also. So the infrastructure projects will receive lower. Already we know that infrastructure sector in India is facing constraints. On the top of it, all these constraints are further getting added. Now, we understood what is the uniqueness of the company, what has happened, and what has been the impact, but what exactly caused this event? This event has fundamentally caused due to something known as over leveraging and resulting asset liability mismatch. Let's understand what is over leveraging and asset liability mismatch. ILFC needs funds for 10 to 15 years because it executes large projects like, as we said, Chennai Nursery, etc., large projects, and it usually raises funds for 8 to 10 years and then get the project refinanced. But since last 3 years, banks have stopped refinancing and funding infrastructure projects due to the large economic crisis, NPA, etc., in the banking sector. Now, ILFC has caught in a situation where it needed funds for its fund to complete the major projects which are in different stages of execution. So what happened? They started moving to short-term commercial papers, short-term funding options like commercial paper and debentures. So instead of funding the long-term large projects using long-term loans, they moved to short-term debt instrument options. Why did they go to the short instruments? Because they ran short of the above options of large loans. But what is the problem of following the short-term borrowing? They have higher interest rates. And on the top of it, there are a lot of delays in Indian infrastructure that has occurred. So due to the high interest rate of short-term debt instruments and the delays in infrastructure projects, what happened? The ILFS started having a bad asset to liability balance sheet. So if you look at the income and the outcome of the ILFC, it started getting mismatches. So soon ILFC went into a situation of asset liability mismatch, and because it was using short-term funding instruments to finance long-term infrastructure projects. That is a key cause of the crisis we have just saw. Further, there are other small factors with regard to this, that is known as public sector favoritism. Because we have seen that the nature of ILFC is, it is a state-owned entities have significant share in ILFC. So what happened? ILFC started to get major projects without any mandatory competitive bidding. So it didn't have to go for competitive bidding. Without any necessity of going to competitive bidding, it started getting selected in different major projects. And once it got selected into different major projects, it formed a special purpose vehicle and it started functioning as a private company with full freedom. So it was a private company. It got the benefits of both private company as well as a public company, public sector company. That was another factor. So due to the freedom that it had as a public sector company, its financial balance sheets were loosely checked, like the government would have if it was a private company. Another thing that has happened is there was a corporate mismanagement. When the registrar of companies conducted an inquiry, they found that there was a mismanagement and compromise in the corporate governance norms in IL FC company. It faked the financial statements to hide the mismatch between cash flows and payment obligation. Another thing that has happened was RBI, which was supposed to monitor a systematically important NBFC like ILFC, did not do the regulation properly. Another problem that has happened was credit rating agency until October used to rate all the bonds and commercial papers of Island FC in highest rating. And suddenly when the default happened, they changed to junk status. They could not predict the larger crisis that has happened in the Island FC. So what is the point? Why should an investor depend on the credit rating agency if it's not able to rate properly the different commercial papers? And the reason for this is, largely in India, credit agencies get paid by the particular entity itself. For example, if a credit company is going to rate the bonds of Island FC, it gets paid by Island FC itself. So due to these reasons, they do not genuinely rate the bonds and commercial papers of Island FC. So that has also added to the issue. Now let's understand what has been the different steps taken by the government to overcome this crisis. The first thing, as we have said, the government took over the board of the Island FC under the Companies Act 2013 and formed a new board under the leadership of Uday Kotak, and that company started finalization of a restructuring plan, identification of different valuation assets, and gradually sell these assets to pay the outstanding loan. That is the activity that has been in process. And in Indian history, this is the second time that something like this happening, like government taking over the board of another company. In Satyam case, in 2009 also, government had taken over the board of Satyam because they also faked the cash flow and government had to intervene. Now, this is the action that has been taken by the government. What more can government do? Government can disinvest, can sell all the assets of ILFC. It can restructure the loans that is present there. Government can put money into the ILFC so that it can function as a proper company. Or, as government has done in different cases, of different NBFCs that defaults, it can turn Island FC simply into a bank also. Now let's see what are the steps taken by RBI. RBI has initially conducted some open market operations and injected money into the economy, almost 36,000 crore, and has been invested by RBI through open market operation. And RBI has allowed banks to provide partial credit enhancements to the bonds issued by systematically important NBFCs registered with RBI. So for the bonds issued by these NBFCs, other NBFCs in the economy, the RBI will provide a credit enhancement. That is another step taken by the RBI. One more step taken by RBI is it allowed banks to lend up to 15% to non-infrastructure NBFCs. These are the different steps taken by RBI. Now, what should RBI continue to do? It should strictly supervise the SIBs, which it failed to do. Now, what should SEBI do? SEBI should put stricter norms for the rating agencies. Presently, the rating agencies, as we have seen, is following a issuer pay model. It should change into regulator pay model where SEBI can pay the credit rating agencies instead of companies. And SEBI should enforce that NBFCs should only take 20% of their loans from short term. Now the present crisis has happened because the IL and FC started taking a lot of their loans from short term instead of depending on long term. So this short term dependency must be restricted to 20%. That is one step the SEBI can enforce. And what can NBFCs do in this scenario? NBFCs presently are going abroad, are going for external commercial borrowings for money. That is presently what they are doing. That's a step taken by them. But along with that, in future, they should give preference to asset liability matching than focusing on profitability. IL and FC went around and took different infrastructure projects without taking into consideration whether its liabilities are meeting its assets. Further, NBFCs should diversify their lending. They should not just lend into infrastructure only. They should send into different other sectors also, so that it can manage any crisis that can happen. Further, government has taken one more important step, that it has started an investigation by Serious Fraud Investigation Office into the mismanagement that has happened into IL and FC. That is a step taken by the government. Further, now one sector that has been affected by the IL and FC crisis is infrastructure sector. How can we ensure proper funding happening in the infrastructure sector? Now, it is being proposed that a new body known as, it's not a new body, the option known as Infrastructure Investment Trust, known as INVITs, must be used by different developers. What is InvITs? They are mutual fund-like institution that can enable investments into infrastructure sector by pooling small sums of money from different stakeholders, and they will once this infrastructure makes profit, that profit will be shared with the stakeholders. So INVITs, this is the new model that is being proposed, to be widely used in the infrastructure sector to overcome this crisis. So that's all. These are the different way forward to overcome the IL and FC crisis. That's all for today. Thank you.